are you asking Citizen A, or not asking, demanding at gunpoint, but
Right.
Citizen A finance the particular needs and wants and circumstances of Citizen B? It's a very short slide down the slippery slope from that to slavery.
Nothing can survive without profiting. Do you think farmers, when human beings first stopped foraging for their food and started farming, that they wanted to reap less than they sowed?
The Barney and Clyde Show, delivered fortnightly and forthrightly.
There's a lot of myths out there surrounding healthcare, and I think it's a topic that's been on everybody's minds lately. There's a lot of promises being made.
Well, here we go. I don't know. It's certainly been since the ACA was passed and implemented. It's been in, since the Obamacare era got going. But one time I went to a doctor, and it was just going to be basically a general practitioner type doctor. Mm-hmm. It was going to be a routine visit, just consult about mostly maintenance stuff, and little health issues. I wanted to, I'll prescribe you some of this and all that good stuff. And I knew beforehand it was going to be $85. So I had $85 in cash folded up in my wallet, and I went to this place. Okay. And we had a very nice visit, and I got done, and I went to the front desk lady, and I said, here's my $85 in cash. She says, oh, no, we have your insurance on file. Let's run it through your insurance and see how much they'll pay of it. I said, why don't you just take my money and then we're all done with the transaction? Right. You've got your money and I'm all clean on my end. Mm-hmm. And she says, oh, no, that's right. She would not take, she would not hear of my suggestion. And so... I'm
surprised they knew how much the service cost.
Sure enough, about 3 weeks later, I got a bill from the clinic that this doctor belonged to for $85.
$85. Yeah. Insurance paid nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the whole explanation about, well, you see, you're building up deductibility or something. Yeah. Boys and girls, my story, I think, illustrates a very elemental point that represents our overlap. Freedom is always elegantly simple compared to anything else.
Yeah, and the more roadblocks you put in between a person and their freedom to interact with another person is just going to make that transaction either difficult, costly, or bureaucratic, or there's going to be some element of force involved in it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, what's your story?
Okay, so your story reminds me of another one. I'm going to tell a short one and then a long one.
All right, very good.
So the short one is I went to the doctor and I was not covered, had no insurance.
Okay.
Right. So I was feeling very, very sick. So I went into the clinic and I just asked them, how much does an appointment cost? Let's say they don't prescribe me anything. Let's say that I just see the doctor and they give me some advice and I'm on my way. What's that cost? And they had no idea.
Really?
No idea. Like, they couldn't tell me how much it cost. They're like, well, it costs, insurance. Like, do you have some of that,
Yeah. That's why I'm asking you.
But my long story is, when my first daughter was born, actually when both my daughters were born, and the conservative in you is going to hate this, but we were not married.
Okay.
So when we had our first baby, I worked for a major corporation, and I had the domestic partner benefits.
Okay.
So my wife was covered through her pregnancy.
All right.
We went to one hospital when we lived in Indianapolis, and our baby was delivered. And she had this enormous room. She had people waiting
on her
hand and foot, bringing her beverages and fluffing her pillow, and it was like having a suite at the Hilton. It was wonderful. It was really nice, actually.
Yeah.
I was like, thank God I have insurance. This is great,
Yeah.
And then our second daughter, was born a few years later, and I was working for an independent consultant, and I had benefits, but since we weren't married, they didn't have the domestic partner thing, so she wasn't covered. Well, I paid for that entire pregnancy out of pocket. I paid for it in cash money, basically.
Yeah, okay.
I wrote them check after check after check. And I paid a total of $3,300 for the second one, which was $2,200 less than my copay for the other one, for my first daughter. So when I paid in cash, it was done. When I paid in insurance, I paid over $10,000. And the insurance company left me with, like half of it.
Yeah.
So it cost me more to have insurance.
As I've thought about this a great deal, of course. You know, it's interesting. Healthcare really, as a huge focus of our government, got going shortly after Bill Clinton got elected in the early '90s. Hillary, who didn't have any official office at the time, but she started convening groups of thinkers about the matter, and it struck me at the time. Why is she all preoccupied with this? Is there something real wrong with our healthcare system? You know, I didn't. It seemed to me like there was. You know, and I'm a guy I'm a pretty informed guy. But your point about insurance is something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and health insurance ought to be for catastrophic occurrences. Really, I mean, everybody knows the story about your car insurance doesn't cover an oil change. But it really is true. There is so much that could benefit from that third party being removed from consumer and seller.
I think it really demonstrates
consumer and producer, buyer and seller.
How market forces really should work between buyer and seller.
Yeah.
Right? When they knew that I didn't have insurance and that I was going to be paying, they scaled the service appropriate to me. Right?
Yeah.
Still, the amount of money that I paid for that was a lot of money for me, especially at the time. It was really tough to come up with that money. I was doing the whole Dave Ramsey thing. We were counting every pennies, eating beans and rice and beans, and we were doing it.
Right.
But when that whole insurance is going to take care of it, or we can milk the insurance company situation.
See what you can get out of it.
Let's see what we can get out of them first.
Right.
Yeah. When that situation was removed, they found an appropriate scale for us. And now we didn't have the big nice room.
Right.
They did bring her a Sprite or something like that. You know, she had the anesthesiologist. She had all the care she needed. We had a comfortable room, and it was scaled appropriately. When somebody else was paying, when Dad's paying, you buy the cheesecake at the end of the meal. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So I think that shows you at least a small anecdotal example of how there's a lot of myths surrounding healthcare, and one of those myths is that healthcare in the United States is a free market.
Yeah, and that's tossed up in the face of those who would really like to see a free market all the time. Yeah, and hasn't been for some time, if ever.
Yeah.
And well, we were talking before the show started that some of this got going during World War II with wage caps and a shortage of talent, because a lot of things were going to, including human resources, were going to the war effort, and so to attract and retain top talent, companies started offering what came to be known as a benefit package in lieu of the just out and out salary compensation they would have given them. Yeah, and that's and health insurance has been tethered to employment to a large extent ever since.
Right. And so when the ultimately the larger economy is not free, right? Employers aren't allowed to compensate in certain ways.
Yeah.
Or if they compensate at certain levels, they will be taxed higher or pay other penalties.
Yeah.
Then they find ways to attract the top talent, like you said, and that comes in the forms of fringe benefits.
Exactly.
And now we have this behemoth of a insurance situation on our hands that's developed out of government pressure in the marketplace.
Yeah. The further injection of government into the whole picture greatly exacerbated this. And I'm not letting private sector companies like insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies off the hook.
No, absolutely not.
You've got to, if you're going to preach the benefits of capitalism, if you are a capitalist yourself, if you're running a pharmaceutical company or an insurance company or anything else, you've got to play fair.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We're talking about a free market,
exactly.
which I realize is sort of a fairy tale, but in a free market, the cost of healthcare, it's not.
Yeah. Can you imagine if more healthcare were provided on the model you were talking about, the way your second child was born? There'd be more people providing that service and competing with each other to do so, which would drive the price down and make even the bronze level maternity suite Very nice.
That's right, and affordable.
Yeah.
But the thing is we expect to use government as a force to drive the costs down and as a force to make sure that everyone gets covered and things like that. But what ultimately happens in this system where we have sort of the worst of both worlds is that government gets used to ensure the monopoly of healthcare providers. And we know that most providers are going to try to get everything that they can, right, in any industry selling any product. There's a lot of people who will be altruistic, but we can pretty much guarantee that the business, like Milton Friedman said, the business of business is business. Right. And they're going to try to make as much profit as they possibly can. That's fine. But the only way that they can continue to do that is to monopolize the marketplace, to force people out of performing in the market, set the barrier so high that new people can't enter the market.
Which puts a damper on innovation.
Yeah.
Human ingenuity, coming up with
So imagine if there were two hospitals in any town. Ever wonder why there's usually one hospital in every town, unless you get into big cities, and then there's only one hospital, that there's a hospital for different areas and things like that. Like those are controlled as to where those places can open and operate.
Okay.
So you keep new players out of the market. You keep them from driving down the cost of the care.
Yeah. Are most hospitals at this point organized as not-for-profit corporations?
I don't know.
I don't know. I think our local one is.
Yeah, but being a not-for-profit organization means that your mission is not profit. It doesn't mean you're not allowed to profit. You are allowed to profit handsomely.
But you're handled differently from a tax standpoint.
That's true.
Your status with the IRS is different.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just getting away with something really sneaky, because they're clearly profiting, and they clearly have the intent to profit.
You can't run a great anything in this world without making a profit. It's how you survive.
Nothing can survive without profiting. Do you think farmers, when human beings first stopped foraging for their food and started farming, that they wanted to reap less than they sowed? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the whole point was to profit. Even if they were hunting, going out into the woods, do you think they wanted to come back with fewer calories than they left with?
Right. Yeah. And the whole business of inventing farming was to gain leverage over your resources.
That's right. Yeah.
So
another myth, the insurance industry itself, is that a free market? Can you buy it across state lines, for example?
Exactly. Right.
So the government set an artificial barrier against you being able to buy from the insurance company that you want to buy from, and they have the liberty to keep their costs high because they know that you have a limited amount of options.
Hey pal, I'm the only game in town.
That's right. That's right. Or I'm one of a few. And,
right.
We have an understanding.
That's right. Yeah. Sure. And which Adam Smith, somewhere in the Wealth of Nations, says that that there will never be two people in the same line of trade that will not, if left to their own temptations, when they get together, collude on price fixing and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing, of course.
And I think that's a real concern. And I think that that when my leftist friends bring that situation up, I think they have a very valid point.
Well, which as conservatives, we like to say that free market, economic freedom only works if there's a strong moral foundation.
Yes. And having a very valid point doesn't mean that you're correct.
You
got a good point.
Yeah.
We've got a number of matters to get into today.
Yeah, so you want to start with the minimum wage?
Bad ideas that will not die. This is one that we've discussed before. And I'd like to set the table by going over my 3 principal reasons why the minimum wage is a bad and wrong idea.
Okay.
There are at least 3, and they are these. 1, and I think this is probably supremely important, it's government telling a private organization how to conduct its affairs.
And a private individual what price they must sell their labor at.
Yes.
Sorry for your
yeah.
sense.
Because Old Uncle Barnes' first rule of economics is that a good or service is worth what buyer and seller agree that it's worth. Period. No other entity has any business being involved in that. Certainly not government.
Labor is no different.
Yes. Okay, which leads us to reason number 2. It distorts the market value of an hour's worth of labor. How do we know what stocking shelves in a given workplace is worth if government is insisting that you pay a certain amount for it?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then item 3, which one kind of leads to the other in these. Item 3, it elbows out the most economically vulnerable among us, principally minority youth without much work experience, out of the labor market.
And therefore out of the first rung on the ladder.
You bet.
Up to success.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that is why, but it's the bad idea that won't die.
Yeah. So let's could we unpack that a little bit, because to play devil's advocate, the left-leaning person, full of care and compassion, and probably legitimately so, would say, but Barney, that's not a living wage. Whatever the minimum wage is today, so $7.15 an hour, something like that, $7.25. That's not a living wage. You can't support a family on that.
Two things about that. One, an employer has no obligation to tailor the givens of a job description of what his organization needs, what function it needs performed for those who need to support a family. And once again, Adam Smith's invisible hand. Those who need to support a family are going to gravitate to something.
Yeah.
The freedom still lies with,
as I like to say, Adam Smith's idea of the invisible hand, but those are very, very visible hands. Millions and millions and millions of very visible hands moving the economy.
Yeah, the applicant for a given job is free to say that's not going to meet my needs, and I'm going to have to take a pass and keep looking.
That's right.
You bet.
And that job might be perfect for somebody. It might, like you said, it might be a person who's in their youth, who's just getting started. Yeah. And the statistics say that that's minority youth most often.
You bet.
And if we're looking at people getting their first introduction into workplace and the marketplace and selling their labor and getting management experience and all that rising to the top, that first rung on the ladder is very important.
Absolutely. And the other side of the coin is, if an employer does decide to take heed of this moral obligation thing that our hypothetical leftist would be talking about, they're going to have to cut costs somewhere or raise prices.
Yeah.
And
the biggest cost to any business is labor.
Yeah.
I think in 99% of cases.
Sure.
And labor is not just expensive because the business is paying directly to the person who's employed. They're paying for insurance for that person. They're paying for insurance for that person. They're paying for taxes for that person. They're paying maybe some types of benefits for that person. They're paying workers' comp and all that kind of stuff.
Bet.
So it costs businesses often half again what the labor expense is just to keep somebody employed.
Which, this is being played out in the political realm.
I love this.
Bernie Sanders, who proudly calls himself a socialist and has been, is a huge advocate of minimum wage. He's agreed to pay his campaign staff $15 an hour minimum wage after some unionized staff members were causing a fuss about it.
They were salaried employees, right? And they said, well, if we take into account all the hours we work, we're working out to like $12, $13 an hour, something like that. So we want the 15.
Yeah, he's doing that. He's cutting back their hours.
They cut their hours.
Yeah. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Here's what I can pay you, people. You want me to bump up your wage and bump your hours, or are we going to go vice versa?
This, to me, is like a delicious piece of chocolate.
Yeah.
Like, it just tastes so good. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, just the fact that he learned, the guy has had like 60 years to learn economics 101 and hasn't.
Right.
So the fact that he's displaying them, regardless of whether he absorbs the lesson or not, he's displaying economics 101 to the world in clear form, and I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. The development comes days after the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office concluded that a proposed $15 federal minimum wage, which the House passed, didn't it?
Yeah, House passed it.
Thank goodness the Senate won't. But anyway, a $15 federal minimum wage would result in 3.7 million people becoming unemployed. And then, dig this, in 1987, the New York Times...
Of all
Yes. Published a editorial, the title of which was "The Right Minimum Wage, $0."
Yeah.
And if a higher minimum wage means fewer jobs, why does it remain on the agenda of some liberals? A higher minimum wage would undoubtedly raise the living standard of the majority of low-wage workers who could keep their jobs. The gain, it is argued, would justify the sacrifice of the minority who would become unemployable. The argument isn't convincing. Those at risk from a higher minimum wage would be young, poor workers who already face formidable barriers to getting and keeping jobs. Now we've got Rashida Tlaib calling for a $20 minimum wage.
My favorite thing about that is, well, they already have proposed in New York City a $30 minimum wage. But the my favorite part of this tirade of hers was that I can't allow, this is a quote, I can't allow people to work for tips. What damn business is yours?
I know.
What do I work for? And honestly, like, I'm speaking as someone who waited tables and tended bar for about a decade.
Yeah.
And I could make $20 an hour pretty easily a lot of the times. I worked at one restaurant where I had to split tips between everybody. I had to tip the busser, I had to tip the bartender, I had to tip everybody. And I still made about $15 an hour. I worked at bars, attending bar, where I made well over $20 an hour. So a lot of people, if we got a $20 minimum wage, I can't allow people to work for tips. They're going to cut people's salaries. Salary's a bad word, but you know what I mean?
Right.
People's real income is going to go down. And, you know, if you're working for $20, $25 an hour for tips, and it's inconsistent, and you're trying to raise a family on that, any impact to that is going to be really devastating.
Yeah. Here's a question for you. Do you feel like you have enough of a pulse on where the nation's, where our collective mindset is headed as an American people? These things do get shot down most of the time now, or once in a while some city, Seattle or San Francisco, will institute a minimum wage and quickly find out what a bad deal it is. And, are we, will a sufficient critical mass of this nation continue to understand that minimum wage is not an economic boon, no matter how fair it looks on the surface?
Never. As Milton Friedman said, we need to set it, index it to inflation, and then forget about it. Because the populace is never going to examine the economic undergirders of anything.
It's their freedom we're talking about, though.
Well,
back to this buyer and seller of a good or service. It is their ability to negotiate as applicants for jobs.
Well, we become a society that, well, we became a society that only read the headlines, right?
Yeah.
And we're quickly becoming a society that only reads the memes. Right?
Yes.
So the people do not have the full context of the implications of any proposed set of policies.
As I often say in these situations, for my money, a lot of this stuff has a spiritual implication as well. Human beings give up a little bit of their humanity when they give up their the range of choices that they're permitted to make. When they willingly give that up, they become a little more like cattle that just want their daily gruel and then be shown where the corral is to the pen, you know?
Right. And some people are content with that, and a lot of people aren't content with that. And I think the people who want to rise up the ladder will do that unless you put roadblocks like this in front of them. And and again, going back to minimum wage, I don't think. Well, let me rephrase that. It's really easy to think that you and me talking about economics and talking about the minimum wage, what a bad idea it is. Someone on the outside who's caring about people and wants people to make a living wage and prosper
do well,
and support their families.
Right.
Would say, oh God, you guys are evil. You don't want people to make a living wage. No, we want people to make a living wage, and we see this as an impediment to it because the evidence bears that out. And it's not just the fact that there's you can't just put a dollar amount and say people need to make $15 an hour. That's an arbitrary marker, because when they make $15 an hour and that's enforced, all the costs of all the goods that they rely on is going to go up because the people producing them now make more money, and the cost of producing that stuff increases. Okay, now there's going to be an economic offset as people have more money doing those jobs, but the overall result is typically negative. So the question is, how far does your money spend? How strong is the dollar? How much can you get for it? Not how many of them you have, because you can easily have $30 an hour, as New York City is proposing, but if a McDonald's hamburger costs you that $30, you're not winning. You've gone in a negative direction.
Yeah. It just turns pennies into dimes and dimes into dollars, and
Yep.
Yeah, it's an inflationary tactic, actually.
It is. It is. And inflation is the real tax.
This past Thursday at a town hall event in the Bronx, she said that everybody should be given access to guaranteed homes before. I love that word, access.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, but before anyone is allowed to and this one gets the steam starting to come out of my ears.
I love this.
The privilege to earn a profit.
The privilege to earn a profit. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. I mean, and she says we have to make sure that housing is being legislated as a human right. What does that mean? What it means is that our access and our ability and our guarantee to having a home comes before someone else's privilege to earn a profit.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, yeah, go.
Well, I wonder. I just wonder if you put the same stipulations on bartending. If I bartended for 10 years or more.
Yeah, I did too.
If at what point am I privileged enough to earn a tip? You know what I mean?
Right.
Once I've completed the transaction. And one thing I love about the word access is everyone has access to housing. You just need to pay for it because there's a pricing structure in place.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What I love about those, as the way rights are defined, is that there's nothing brick and mortar about any of those things. You have the right to life, right? We're not going to kill you, and we'll do a reasonable job of protecting the peace and whatever. Yeah. So to allow you to seek your own way through life. And access is a word that's not, okay, it's not housing. Access to housing and housing is not the same thing.
Hey, thank you, yes. Now, the way the other kind of thinking about rights, a big leap forward in that was Franklin Roosevelt's, his 1944 State of the Union address in January 1944, and in which he...
You'll have to explain me on this one.
He laid out a second Bill of Rights. His remedy was to declare his remedy for the inadequacy, as he saw it, of the political rights guaranteed by our Constitution and Bill of Rights, was to declare these things to be a right. Employment, that is the right to work. Food, clothing, and leisure with enough income to support them. Farmers' rights to a fair income. Fair, that's another one of those interesting words.
Yeah.
It's kicked around a lot. It's talk about subjective.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you define what's fair?
Exactly. Yeah. Freedom from unfair competition and monopolies.
Wait. Freedom from unfair competition and from monopolies?
That's what, yeah.
Okay. It's like freedom from the chicken and the egg.
Yeah. How the ones that we're still talking about here in 2019, housing, medical care, Social Security, and education. All right, here's the problem, and it also points up the exquisite vision of our founding fathers, particularly Jefferson, in a moment of perhaps divine inspiration, writing the Declaration of Independence. Honing in on what is a right and creating a boundary around that and excluding what can't be a right. You can't have a right to anything that requires your fellow human being to do something, to exert effort. For reasons that are obvious to me anyway, is a very short slide down the slippery slope from that to slavery. I mean, the assumption that you can have a right
to the outputs of someone else's labor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's impossible by definition for health care to be a right. And, maybe starting down that path, you got to talk about what a broad category health care is. I mean, it includes everything from being an x-ray technician to being a physical therapist to being a pharmacist to being a surgeon. And healthcare is a pretty chiropractor, whatever. It's a pretty broad. But be that as it may, all those occupations I just mentioned require somebody doing something.
And whether something is a right or not, again, back to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, all those things sound like, well, they're not things. They're just the absence of things. Exactly. They're the absence of roadblocks encumbering you from being able to pursue your own destiny. And housing and healthcare, you can say those things are right. And education, sure. You can say those things are rights. And that doesn't make them manifest.
Yeah. Another way to put it would be, I don't have to do anything for you to have a right to life.
Right.
I don't have to do anything for you to be free. Or pursue your own happiness.
That's right.
I don't have to do a thing. I can sit over here and do whatever I want to do.
And what you want to do might be, you might want to buy an apartment building. You might want to provide housing, right? And this reminds me of rent control, which backfired marvelously every time it's been tried. It always results in housing shortages because the incentives aren't there for the people who are going to provide that service. You know what I mean? If you talk about, you want there to be more people having housing provided for them or having access to housing. Well, access to housing comes from someone wanting to provide it, and unless someone's going to want to provide it, unless there's some profit in there for them, they're not going to provide it. There's going to be less of it, and then that's going to make the market shift in other ways. So you'll only rich people are going to be able to afford the housing, and there's going to be less housing available for poor people. And then she'll say, well, the stingy landlords aren't willing to, be altruistic and provide free housing for poor people. Now we need a whole government-run project situation.
Yes, we will coerce them into doing so. And
and they'll never be held accountable for the fact that their project is in shambles. Is a toxic environment full of mold and broken windows and all the things they'd never let a private landlord get away with.
Yes. The whole notion of what is a right, what can't even be remotely considered as being a right, it is of supreme importance. And sometimes you hear folks say today, well, all right, maybe it's just a matter of terminology then. Healthcare, maybe we shouldn't talk about a right, but we should talk about a moral obligation. Well, you're still talking about the same thing. Who's going to provide the healthcare?
Right.
Who's going to be motivated to study to be a doctor or a physical therapist or an x-ray technician or
That's
whatever?
right.
Yeah.
Because is the incentive there for them to do that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there might be incentive to become a doctor because because the government, if the government runs healthcare, the government's going to pay the doctor. So you may still have the incentive to become a doctor and practice medicine, but if the profits aren't in, opening up a surgery center, running a private or orthopedic or ergonomics type of situation, or if the profit's not there for to develop pharmaceuticals, then how are you going to make those things if they're rights? That doesn't make them manifest. How do you actually align the resources to make the stuff that people need? How do you get all the insulin that the diabetics are going to need? How are you going to get the hypodermic needles? Where do they come from?
Exactly. And sometimes the counter to that you hear is that, life's more than the selfish motivation of earning a profit.
Right.
Profit is how you gauge the health of your economic enterprise, of what you are doing.
Yeah.
You can't just break even, or you're not going to be able to do any more of what you've been doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's funny when people love to talk about democracy and the merits of democracy, but real democracy is manifested through dollar votes. You know what I mean? When you buy stuff, you are expressing your moral values, and sometimes it looks ugly. The left is not wrong in that regard. Sometimes it looks ugly what we choose to value over other things. But guess what? We're all guilty.
Oh, economics winds up, in that sense, being a mirror of what's happening culturally.
Yeah.
This isn't exactly a digression. About a week ago, the Midwest suffered a big rash of tornadoes, 8 in one night here in northern Indiana, and right across the border in Ohio, it was at least as bad.
Yeah,
and while it was going on, this poor weatherman on a TV station in Dayton was trying to keep people updated to the minute, and because you might have to,
right,
if it's
take
moving,
shelter.
Yeah, right. And people were calling the station complaining that it was preempting The Bachelorette, and he finally went off on a rant and said, "Will you please knock it off? I'm trying to keep you and your neighbors safe." And
right.
The point being that the reason I bring it up is because in a lot of ways we do have our priorities skewed in this country, but you can't use the coercive force of government to rectify that.
Yeah. I agree, and that's the same thing with medicine. When we talk about lining up the resources needed to provide medicine. Well, no one's going to make the claim that Germany or whatever socialized healthcare country. Of course, they have hypodermic needles. Of course, they have the diabetic supplies. Of course, they have that stuff. But what I find fascinating about the left's demand for that healthcare, that style of healthcare, is that they wouldn't accept a monopoly in any other industry, right? A private monopoly.
Yeah.
But the government will source their supplies from one provider. They'll grant a special privilege, if you will, to a specific provider, and however that pharmaceutical company has to grease the palms of whoever's buying the insulin at the state hospital, they're going to do that. So they're literally manifesting these corrupt monopolistic partnerships through this socialized healthcare. I mean, at least that's the way I think it would manifest in the United States.
Yeah. But the whole question of what is a right surfaces for me over and over again when this kind of stuff comes along. You have to keep paring it back down to the basics, which Jefferson did in the Declaration, and which Madison did in the Bill of Rights, or the Madison et al., the people at the Constitutional during that period.
Yeah.
You've constantly got to ask yourself, winnow out what can't be right by asking the tough questions. Does this, and it all boils down to, does this require anything of my fellow human being?
Yeah.
And if
Or
so,
does
it's something other than a right?
Does it require you to crack a couple of skulls? I mean, from a libertarian perspective, you have a right to be whatever you want to be. As long as you don't initiate force against someone else, you have no right to initiate force on somebody.
We often talk about things that our dads imparted.
Oh, we should, dad wisdom would be a good segment.
It would. 'Cause my dad used to say a lot, my right to swing my arm ends at the tip of your nose.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's very good. Yeah. I like it.
And but
it comes down to what people don't see as violent acts. Right, the taking of your money through the tax system is force.
It is,
because you don't have a choice.
People sometimes in online snits, or sometimes in person arguments. I'll refer to taxation as seizure at gunpoint of what's yours. Oh, come on! I've been filing 1040 forms for
Yeah.
40 years, and I've never felt like
Barney, it's the price you pay for living in a civilized society.
Yeah, right.
Well, this is a very civilized society. Would you agree?
Right. Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit, but that's only because you're willing to.
Yeah.
Decide some year that you're not going to, and see how fast it takes you to start getting in trouble.
Probably the writer that I probably admire the most, Henry David Thoreau.
Okay.
One of my favorite quotes from him is, I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it's like, I have no problem paying the highway tax because I am I desire to be a good neighbor as much as a bad subject, and I like that because we can get into little pissing matches or whatever about taking someone's money for roads and hospitals and what's supposedly good things is this tyranny, right? Well, I don't think that paying my highway tax, paying my tax for the roads is a tyranny necessarily, but a lot of tyrannical things are done with taxes. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Wars are fought with taxes. People are oppressed with taxes. People's property is appropriated away from them. Mm-hmm. Special interests have their pockets lined with tax money. So it's not a one-to-one thing.
Once again, just like with rights, when you talk about taxation, ask the hard questions and winnow it down to what a just tax is. And I think kind of the question there, just like the question with rights being, does it require something of your fellow human being?
Right.
The question with taxation is there anything redistributive about it? Mm-hmm. Are you asking Citizen A, or not asking, demanding at gunpoint, but
right.
Citizen A finance the particular needs and wants and circumstances of Citizen B? And we've talked about this before with urban redevelopment, cities with moribund shopping malls that decide to bring them back to life with federal subsidies. Mm-hmm. You're asking folks in Montana and Hawaii and Ohio and Alabama to cough up their hard-earned money, which is theirs because they earned it, to finance a mall that they'll never go.
And if they refuse to pay the tax, you will throw them in a steel and concrete cage.
Exactly.
And if they don't go to the cage, you'll shoot them. Exactly. I mean, that is force. I'm sorry, but it's force. Even if it's for something as benign as roads.
The ban on advancement, there's just a real feel to the green scare people that what really bothers them is that the human race has advanced the way it has.
Yeah.
That we have the technology that when somebody breaks his leg on a mountainside and that a helicopter can, or somebody can be summoned by smartphone and GPS can guide a helicopter, and the helicopter can come and get the person out of there and get them to an ER in a timely fashion. Little old ladies in cramped apartment buildings in big cities can have air conditioning and not sweat to death. We have the technology to do a podcast sitting here at the libations. You know what I'm saying? For heaven's sake, automobiles, airplanes, smartphones. Everything that makes our life convenient, safe, and comfortable is a result of the exponential leap in human advancement over the last 200 years. And that started with our discovering enormous potential of petroleum and other fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. And early ways of extracting it and processing it were somewhat dirty, and they polluted our air, and we're aware of that.
Right.
But
no, they were very dirty.
Yeah.
Modern iterations of that are somewhat dirty.
Yeah. Okay.
Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Although, I mean, the United States, once again, compared to, say, China or other emerging large countries like India, Brazil, we've got our air is far cleaner than
I think that's an important point, is like when you say something is something, you have to say compared to what? Yeah. Are we comparing ourselves to China or India? Mm-hmm. Are we comparing coal against natural gas or against biodiesel? Or what are we talking about, and what are we trading off?
Yes. Now, okay, and with regard, we can talk about clean air. We can talk about cost of this and that. But I think all three of the things we're going to look at in this segment are come down to our basic point, which is that human freedom is at stake in these things. Mm-hmm. The first being renewable portfolio standards. There are 29 states that have renewable portfolio standards. it's kind of like the Obamacare mandates, you will buy insurance. You will get X amount of your energy from renewable, quote unquote.
Right.
In other words, play-like sources instead of normal people sources. There, I said it.
Yeah.
Wind and solar, which most of the time you can't get the windmill blades to turn, and you can't build up a solar energy in your panel, and you need backup.
Yeah.
And you need petroleum products to provide the energy to make the panels and the windmills.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And I see very little sort of total cost of ownership stuff. They assume that everything renewable is also that equals clean, zero emissions, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that wind turbine has to be manufactured,
Yes.
right? All the little components have to be scrubbed and heat treated, and the chemicals to do that have to be trucked in, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then it has to be carted out there and assembled and maintained. And I've read that the carbon footprint, excuse me, of windmills, they say it pays back in like 5 to 8 years or so, and that's good. It seems to be a net win over coal when you can give it the long term, and when the market is free and there aren't these other factors that skew the results.
But the idea that government could tell a utility company, well, a utility company is a public service.
Yeah.
It's still a privately owned company. It has stockholders.
It's a government protected monopoly is what it is.
Yes, but even within that, it's still Duke Energy, Verizon, or Vectren. These are privately held companies, private organizations. The idea that they put out a particular kind of product, and the idea that government would say, you've got to get a particular percentage of your power from these sources. That may not be, excuse me, that's not what we want to do. That's not the business model we've come up with.
And
a good or service is worth what buyer and seller agree that it is worth, period.
old Uncle Barnes' first law of economics.
You bet.
So I don't want government involved in it at all, like at all. I realize that they're going to be involved. So I don't really have a problem if they want to offer some kind of incentive, like, okay, you get a tax decrease by X percent or X dollars if you can hit certain targets, right? If they want to shoot for those goals and offer that incentive, I'm not going to die on that hill.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I think it'd be a much better way to go about it than saying you must get to this level, this metric, and all the poor people who can't afford your product anymore be damned. Or we'll have to subsidize them because they're priced out of the marketplace. Yes. So now we're going to have to use more public money and more public resources that should be going to other places in the economy to cover those people because we've made their lives worse.
Same kind of principle. Once again, here I go mentioning the VSG again. But bailing out farmers because he imposed taxes in this trade war with China. To mention China once again.
Yeah.
And I gave them $16 billion. They ought to be nice and happy. They'd rather produce the product that they have the equipment to do, and decided they wanted to devote their lives to. They'd rather be producing that at a profit than get your bailout.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or subsidizing healthcare because you create an obesity and diabetes epidemic by subsidizing sugar and corn syrup.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you're just going in these circles, and it's just like, it's not even a circle. It's like a Coriolis effect. You know what I mean? Like it's going to go down the drain eventually.
Yeah. But so we handled the freedom angle, but it's also true, yes, that the cost of energy goes up when you implement these.
Do you want to? I've got your.
Yeah, please.
I've got yours queued up here.
This is a fellow from the Clear Energy Alliance, and he's talking about a study that the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago conducted.
Do you want to play part one first?
Yeah, sure.
Does your state have a renewable portfolio standard? Not sure? That's not surprising. It's one of those government programs that sucks money out of your wallet while you're not looking. If you live in one of these 29 states, you should get familiar with your RPS because it's costing you a lot of money every year. What's a lot of money? How about $30 billion annually? That's right, $30 billion for just 29 states, all in the name of forcing you to spend more for electricity generated by unreliable wind turbines and solar panels. Seems crazy, right? All that money for something most people don't even know exists. How did this massive government seizure of your money even happen? A new report put out by the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago provides some uncomfortable answers. The report discovered that the true cost of renewable portfolio standards has been significantly underestimated. Previous studies didn't account for the cost of backup power, typically from natural gas, that has to be on standby when renewables aren't generating electricity, which is about 3/4 of the time. Another factor not considered in older studies is the giant expense of transmission lines that bring the electricity from rural areas to the cities where it's needed. And finally, previous studies ignored the fact that additional wind and solar leads to premature retirement of baseload power plants, which can lead to higher costs for some ratepayers. Does it surprise you that these obvious costs were somehow overlooked so the public could be told that the benign-sounding renewable portfolio standard program wouldn't cost all that much? A lot of states, especially big blue ones, are intent on spending their citizens' money on RPS mandates. By 2030, Massachusetts will require 41% of its electricity to come from renewables. California is mandating 50%, and not to be outdone, New York is in for 60%. And these percentages will almost certainly grow in the future as states try to out-green each other. Apparently, the message about the high costs of RPS programs hasn't gotten out to the people who actually pay the bills. The Energy Policy Institute study examined the price of electricity before and after RPS programs were put into place. What it found was an increase of 11% in 7 years and 17% 12 years after implementation, which is what translates into that $30 billion of extra spending by consumers each year. For people with lower and middle incomes, this is no small matter because they can't avoid the bigger bills. Higher electricity costs take a larger percentage of the paycheck they take home each week. In spite of the financial pinch on poorer people, some folks still believe the much higher prices are worth it because more wind turbines and solar panels are going to lessen the threat of climate change. But like a lot of what people have been told about energy and climate, that idea is a giant myth. But it gets worse. The University of Chicago study demonstrates that attempting to lower carbon dioxide levels through renewable portfolio standards is by far the most expensive way to do it. I'll talk about that in part 2 of our series on the RPS scam.
Yeah, and in part 2 he goes ahead to talk about if you're going to do this top-down government command model, you might as well go with a good old carbon tax or cap and trade arrangement.
My favorite part of that was like when they say, it's just so common, where they say, yeah, but there's some sacrifices must be made, but it's worth it. It's like, yeah, it's worth it to me to sacrifice your well-being.
Yeah, yeah, and of course this all hinges on insisting there's a crisis and that the post-American public approach it with a requisite sense of urgency. That's what the whole Green New Deal idea is all about, that we've only got 12 years left and so forth.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always thus. Don't you have something about how the big alarm,
are we ready?
40 plus years ago, was quite the opposite.
This is my favorite thing, and it's not just because of Leonard Nimoy, but it's heavily influenced.
Okay.
All right, let's go back to 1979.
The data shows that average temperatures in the Arctic have fallen dramatically over the last 30 years. In most locations, the drop has been about 2 degrees centigrade. At that rate, the descent to Ice Age temperatures could take less than 200 years. It is not only the lonely Arctic that is cool. The whole northern hemisphere is growing steadily colder. There is little doubt that someday the ice will return. At least 8 times in the past million years, it has advanced and retreated with clockwork regularity. If we are unprepared for the next advance, the result could be hunger and death on a scale unprecedented in all of history. What scientists are telling us now is that the threat of an ice age is not as remote as they once thought. During the lifetime of our grandchildren, Arctic cold and perpetual snow could turn most of the inhabitable portions of our planet into a polar desert.
I mean, isn't that fantastic?
It is.
Isn't that just... There's a couple more. There's one more short one with Leonard Nimoy.
Sure.
And then there's another clip I want to play, but we can have a little discussion first if you want.
Okay.
In 1977, the worst winter in a century struck the United States.
Okay.
Arctic cold gripped the Midwest for weeks on end. Great blizzards paralyzed cities of the Northeast. One desperate night in Buffalo, 8 people froze to death in marooned cars. Pat Bushnell was on the road that night.
Traffic just absolutely stopped. I was afraid of being stuck in the car all night long with the cold and the wind running out of gas. And then what? I think that if we had to go through a real bad winter, just like we just went through, I think we'd have to think about moving someplace else.
Move where? The brutal Buffalo winter might become common all over the United States. Climate experts believe the next ice age is on its way. According to recent evidence, it could come sooner than anyone had expected. At weather stations in the far north, temperatures have been dropping for 30 years.
30 years.
Seacoasts, long free of summer ice, are now blocked year-round. According to some climatologists, within a lifetime, we might be living in the next ice age.
In our lifetime, we might be living in the next ice age.
Pretty much the mirror opposite of what
Yep.
Sandy from Westchester tells us.
Yeah, Sandy from Westchester being
Alexandria.
Ocasio-Cortez.
Yes. Right. Yeah. The only way to sell the post-American public on the idea that they got to give up their freedom and turn all the decision-making about energy consumption and production over to the government is to instill a sense of urgency.
Yeah, scare the pants off of them.
Yeah.
Lie to them and scare the pants off.
Yeah. Okay.
And can we do one more climate thing here?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, yeah.
I think this is fun, and again, this clip is a little bit long, so I've queued it up to like 8 minutes, but I really suggest watching this video in its entirety.
Okay.
It's like 15 minutes long. I'll play about a minute to 3 minutes
and
of it.
Maybe post a link to that video
I will do
on
that.
our
I will do that.
YouTube channel and our Facebook page and things like that.
But I want to point out that this is from PBS.
Okay.
Public Broadcasting, a fairly, supposedly a very objective outfit, but we know that they sort of lean left, right?
Yes, we do.
At least. And they put right here, spoiler, no, climate change has nothing to do with this. Okay?
Okay.
So, this is called Is an Ice Age Coming?
A second feedback cycle is equally important.
2016.
Cooler oceans are better at absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and so the Earth's natural greenhouse effect is diminished. There is an unfortunate combination of orbital properties that kickstarts this process. First, low obliquity means less overall sun at high latitudes where the glaciers start. Second, high eccentricity means one hemisphere experiences a bad winter at aphelion, further from the sun. Earth also moves slower at aphelion, and so those long cold winters are not counteracted by the short, warmer summers. And third, the precession of the equinoxes sends the glacier-prone northern hemisphere into a bitter aphelion winter while the eccentricity is high. So when does this happen next? Well, right now, obliquity is decreasing, and it'll bottom out in around 12,000 years. It's currently winter at perihelion in the Northern Hemisphere, but it'll have processed completely to the bad situation in 10,000 years. So, over 10 to 12,000 years, all of that points to cooling. What about the 100,000 year eccentricity cycle that seems to define the overall cycle? Well, actually, we're just coming out of a peak in eccentricity. That should have been bad, and perhaps it would have meant that the upcoming cooling trend would bring the glaciers with it. However, we may have dodged a bullet. See, the recent eccentricity maximum was a sad little peak, and our orbit remained pretty circular. See, as well as the 100,000 year cycle, there's a longer 400,000 year cycle on top of that. Roughly, every fourth eccentricity peak is very low. That just happened, and the next peak will be weak also. We got lucky. We're in a long, stable, low eccentricity phase. Because of this, climate models predict that we have another 25 to 50,000 years of interglacial period left. And that's only if you ignore anthropogenic climate change. Human influence on the climate messes with the whole equation. With CO2 now at 400 parts per million, it's higher than at any point in the Quaternary period. It's been predicted that this may extend the current interglacial for 100,000 years.
Okay.
All right.
So I just want to point out, okay, when people are saying, like, I'm with science, right? I'm with science. They're not talking about the elliptical orbit of the Earth. They're not talking about the fact that the Earth's tilt on its axis actually changes as it orbits. They're not taking into consideration that there's a 12,000, a 10,000, a 12,000, a 100,000, and a 400,000 year cycle that dictates how far the Earth is from the sun at any one point in time, and how what the Earth's tilt is, and the pull of Jupiter on Earth and things like that. They're not weighing all those factors, right? And here we have a guy with a non-American accent telling, and I believe non-American accents, that there's a whole lot more to it than just, okay, a lot of stuff is coming out of the tailpipe and we're all heating up, right? There's way more to it than that, obviously. And at the end of that, he says, well, basically, we're basically at the end of an ice age. So the ice, like Leonard Nimoy said, the ice is bound to return. So we're going to start this new 12,000 year cycle or whatever, and the ice is going to slowly return. So we may be dodging a bullet from the fact that we've changed our climate some by heating it, because it's more conducive to human flourishing to be warm than to be cold.
Yeah.
Which I don't know how I feel about it, and I'm not a science-educated person enough to process it all, but it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting development.